Good evening, everybody. Thanks to all of you who have joined us. Welcome to this webinar on Bluetongue. My name's Rich. I'm from the APHA communications team, and I'm just here to open tonight's event and just give you a quick bit of housekeeping. So you can see we've got people joining us already, which is really good. So tonight's session is all about giving an overview of the current situation with Bluetongue, and then a little bit of information about some of the clinical signs. But probably most importantly, it's an opportunity for you as professionals to ask questions. If any of you have got any questions for our panel, you can actually submit them now. All you need to do is click on the Q&A icon that you should be able to see on your screen on Teams, and you can write in your question. If you could put your names when you ask questions, that would be good. It's always good to know who's asking the questions. And as I say, you can submit them right. You might want to just hear what our presenters have got to say first. So yeah, that's enough to me. Enough from me. Even I'm going to hand over now to our first presenter, which is our UK's Chief Veterinary Officer, Christine Middlemiss. Over to you, Christine.
Great, thanks, Rich. I wonder if you've had a former career, some kind of TV presenter or radio too. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We've done a number of Bluetongue webinars. You may have joined them already, but I wanted to do one specific for vets and most directly to vets who are in the restriction areas. So you have more information at your fingertips on where we're at with the disease, what to be looking out for, the kind of questions that your clients might be asking you, and what's happening on vaccination. I'm joined by Irene Cristofaro, who is the APHA Vet Director, and we also have Sasha, who many of you may be familiar with as the outbreak vet in APHA as well. So without any further ado, we'll start with the slide. So I'm going to take you through where we're at now and hand over to Irene for clinical signs, and then we'll come back to the vaccination bit. Can we have some slides, please, Ellen? I'll carry on talking while we wait for slides to appear. So we've done a lot of work. Obviously, we lost our disease freedom from Bluetongue last November when I confirmed the first case down in Kent. If we go to the next slide, please. We have been preparing over the spring and summer for what an outbreak this summer and into autumn might look like given the levels of virus that were present on the continent. So that first slide is a reminder. It affects ruminants. We can get variable clinical signs, and indeed in the autumn we didn't have any clinical signs, and importantly it is spread by midges. It doesn't spread animal to animal. It's spread through insect biting vectors or potentially by dirty needles not being changed and used between animals, but obviously primarily the midges. So next slide, please. And we'll go into more detail on some of the clinical signs that people have been seeing, but to note as well the actual pathological signs in animals, there are those productivity impacts as well. Also important to note, particularly for the public, it doesn't affect people, it is not a food safety issue. And it's Bluetongue 3 that we're talking about. First time appeared in Europe, in the Netherlands, last September. Of course, previously we'd had Bluetongue 8 arriving back in 2007, which we managed to eradicate through vaccination. Next slide, please. So the midge life cycle, really important. As I said, midges spread it. The virus has an extrinsic incubation period inside the vector, which lasts for between 4 and 20 days, depending on the temperatures. Midges are active, and that extrinsic incubation period happens when there's sustained temperatures above about 12 degrees. So very much a seasonal disease, and the speed of spread through midges is very much temperature dependent. Next slide, please. Only a small proportion of the midges will actually transmit the virus, but the bite of the midge is really, really efficient. One infected midge biting can set off infection in an animal. And as I said, that 12-degree temperature is really important. And although that takes us in the winter to a vector low activity period, we think it is thought generally that midges can hide out in stables and things and manage to stay above 12 degrees and in effect not be frozen and die. So you can get overwintering of midges with the virus, and when it heats up again, the incubation, extrinsic incubation period starts again, which is why we went in so hard with temporary control zones in the autumn to try and prevent any overwintering, because if we'd had overwintering and a really warm spring, we could have had a huge amount of disease over the summer. Next slide, please. So we were expecting this. We have people who have been modelling every day with Met Office weather patterns to understand when we might be at risk from virus being blown over in midges from the continent. Disease didn't really pick up again in the Netherlands and Belgium at the speed we thought it might. The jet stream being lower this summer, early summer, than it has been, kept those temperatures down, and we've benefited from that. And for a number of weeks, the Netherlands sort of trucked along at less than 10 cases a day or lower, but then all of a sudden, about 5 weeks ago, it just took off the amount of virus in the face of the vaccination that they've been doing, but we can come back to that. So we knew we were at risk. We've been modelling the weather patterns and planning for what an outbreak, depending on when the midges came to us, might look like. The map on the right with the different shaded counties, those are our risk. So depending on where virus is in the continent, if it's in sort of northeast of the Netherlands, or if it's down in France, different counties are more exposed. Next slide, please. Don't worry about the figures in this, they're quite scary, but we did this reasonable worst case scenario modelling. The top line is if the virus arrived on the 1st of May. The second line, bottom line, is if it arrived on the 1st of July. The maps on the left are if there are no controls at all. Then we have PZSZs, and then we have temporary control zones on top of that. So increasing movement controls, basically. And this shows from the modelling, movement controls make a big difference. But we know they are burdensome, definitely for farmers within the zone, and particularly at this time of year when there's a lot of breeding sheep movements. Next slide, please. The headlines from the modelling, obviously the sooner the virus came and the longer we had warmer temperatures, the more detections we were going to have. Movement controls do reduce disease. The initial virus presence, because we're relying on passive surveillance, can take a while to detect, but there wasn't any value going to do sampling surveillance, because given that you had all those risk counties, where would you start and how would you ever manage to do enough animals to find where your positive ones? September and October are always likely to be our peak seen months of disease because of the temperatures and that build up. And we modelled on 1/3 of infected farms having clinical signs. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, so surveillance, as I said, was passive. Realistically, it's really difficult to stop the vectors. Culling, so we have been culling the very initial animals in an area that has been disease-free and where we don't believe there is local circulation or even on-farm circulation of the virus, so it's not in the local midges. There is a benefit, perceived benefit, in culling out blue infected animals at that stage. But once you think you have local midge infection, there's no value in further culling. So stopping movements and pre and post movement testing for licensed moves out of an area where there is infection is the most valuable, and we'll come to vaccination as we go further through the presentation. Next slide. So we were carrying out this name modelling, and as the slide shows, on the 11th of August around sunset, the wind was in the right direction, right point. for infected midges to be blown over from those affected parts of the continent, and unsurprisingly, Norfolk, Suffolk into Essex, and that source 6 shows it going to East Yorkshire, and that is exactly, of course, where we found disease. Next slide, please. That was the current situation. That was current as of about 5 o'clock this evening, but I have confirmed another 3 premises, I should say, another 3 premises, so we're at 41 premises now. Another one in Yorkshire, which will extend the TCZ a little bit further north. It's very close to that previous one, but it is going to extend it. One in the south, so within that same 20-kilometre TCZ, the south there, and a further one in Essex. All those in cattle and have been found through surveillance. So Irene will talk about it, but much less clinical signs in cattle than we're seeing in sheep. Next slide, please. So the current zones, again, this is changing slightly as we have more confirmations which are coming through daily. We started off with these temporary control zones, 20 kilometres round infected premises, but as we got more and more overlapping zones, we have put in a bigger restriction zone. So it started with Norfolk, expanded into Suffolk, and then we put Essex in it because we could see report cases and our confirmed cases were coming nearer and nearer that border. And because the restricted area is about stopping movements, we wanted to be ahead of where we thought the infected midges might be, not just following confirmed report cases. So we have put all 3 of those counties in. Also because we know from talking to livestock industry and from movements that those 3 counties, there's quite a lot of movement in terms of markets and abattoirs and things between them. Essex links into Suffolk rather than linking into Kent. We've been trying to get this balance between, whilst protecting, stopping movements or only movements of tested negative animals out of the restriction zone to the free area, but still enabling movement, if necessary, within the restricted area so people can continue to go about some of their business. We'll talk more, there'll be more on the actual requirements for zones. And the green circle there is that temporary control zone around that new premises on the east of Yorkshire. Next slide, please. So around the new zones, as we're trying to stay ahead, to keep the zone ahead of where we understand infection to do, when we have a new area, we have been doing surveillance sampling in that area to understand, again, the prevalence of disease. Do we have local midge infection or not? And that therefore helps us with the exit strategy for those premises and for that control zone. So you may very well be asked to undertake through some of the contracts that APHA have with you, and Irene can talk more about that, asked to confirm some of those, to undertake some of the surveillance sampling. Next slide, please. Licensing of movements. So to move out of the zone, you need to have licenses. There are different types of licenses depending on the movement. So a movement from a farm in the zone to a farm outside the zone needs a specific license. It needs pre-movement testing, specific license to be issued based on those results, and we need post-movement testing. There are some licenses that are general licenses that allow animals to go direct to slaughter to a designated abattoir without testing happening. There are still more licenses to be worked up and issued. We know that markets people would like to move to markets. We're working out, our issue then is how we have ready and quick visibility of the premises that animals might go to from that market. We know that animals don't always stay very long at the first premises they arrive at and may quickly go on to a second one. And if they're tracing, you want to know that information because this is all about trying to protect the free area. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Irene here, who is, I think we're on slide 14, are we? it says clinical signs. Clinical signs, here we are. Yes, I'm going to hand over to Irene, who's going to talk about the clinical signs that farmers may call you about if whether or not they suspect disease. Over to you, Irene. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you very much. So yes, I will now share with you some of the most common clinical signs that we have been seeing during this outbreak, and we'll start with cattle. So as Christine mentioned before, the clinical signs in cattle have been so far quite mild. The most common of all has been lameness, with pain of the feet, but we have also observed a drop in the milk production, crusting of the nose and mouth with ulceration, hypersalivation, and conjunctivitis and lacrimation. In one instance, I think we have also observed lesion of the cornea. Next slide, please. Thank you. With the sheep, the clinical signs have been more severe, very severe sometimes. We have observed fever, depression, nasal discharge, which is the most common clinical sign in sheep, conjunctivitis and lacrimation, crusting around the nostril, edema of the facial area, ulceration of the mouth, hypersalivation, lameness, and often we found animals to be recumbent, respiratory distress, and sometimes mortality has occurred. The pictures shown are all from cases that we investigated during the current outbreak. Next slide, please. And next slide. So this is why it's so important and crucial your role during this outbreak. We urge you to attend the call, even if a farmer calls you and you believe it might be Bluetongue. Please do not suggest to call us straight away. Do attend the farm, inspect the animal, check if it's actually Bluetongue. If you actually suspect Bluetongue, in that case, do contact us immediately. But you know, there is so much that you can do to support the welfare of the animal in that moment. Painkillers and anti-inflammatory drugs seem to make a massive difference in alleviating the clinical signs. The restrictions are placed on farms, not on people. Therefore, you as a private vet can go on site and check on the animals. Some animals we have been observing have recovered, some other get sick again. And if you are involved with an outbreak and an animal has been confirmed and other animals get sick, please do suggest the farmer to get in touch with us again to give us an update on that. That is very important. Next slide. And I also wanted to mention germplasm. Bluetongue virus can be transmitted via infected semen. Sadly, there isn't an accredited test to check if semen is infected or not. Therefore, we need to test the donor animal. If a collection center is located in an area that is currently restricted for Bluetongue, in order to be able to freeze or receive germplasm, the collection center must be designated. And even if the collection center is outside a restricted area, but receive germplasm from an animal that is in the restricted area, it still needs to be designated. Designation imposes testing of the animals. Any animal or germplasm that wants to move on or off a designated premises must be licensed. And further information are on this slide, and this presentation will be shared with you all. So we will now, Christine will now give you a bit of an overview of where we are with the vaccination.
Yeah, so we've been talking to vaccine companies, talking through the various kind of confidentiality and contracting processes and things. You're probably aware that the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and now France have permitted the use of an unauthorised Bluetongue 3 vaccine. There isn't protection from the Bluetongue vaccines for the other strains that were already available. So talking to vaccine manufacturing companies, understanding if they were going to produce vaccine, how long that would take, and so on, along with the Veterinary Medicines Directorate and the Secretary of State. Can't remember the beginning of this week or the end of last week, one day's a bit merging into the other at the moment, agreed or decided that he would permit, and that is produce a permit for the use of the unauthorised Bluetongue vaccines. That allows it to be used under the Veterinary Medicines Directive. Doesn't yet allow it to be used for Bluetongue. What we then have to do, and has been published this evening, is a licence under the Bluetongue regulations, which gives further detail around how the vaccine should be used. The Netherlands have vaccinated something like 95% of their sheep, and they have still been seeing disease. We know a bit more about the picture of what it looks like than we did 3 or 4 weeks ago. They are having fewer deaths, but still having deaths and reduced clinical signs than they saw last year. But what it's demonstrating is that the vaccine is not protective, but it is having some positive impact. Authorisation or non-authorised vaccine means that VMD have assessed it, and these vaccines are based on the same vaccines where there are authorised strains available, vaccines for strains that we know are authorised. So they're reasonably comfortable with it has had consideration around safety and efficacy to a degree, but it has not had the usual field trials and data study that you would expect a vaccine to have. So it means that, whilst as I said, it may not prevent an animal from becoming infected, nor may it prevent them from being infectious, but you may have reduction or potentially prevention of clinical signs if they were, and they are subclinically infected, and reduce mortality. So we see it will be a really individual decision for a farmer based on his production type, when he's topping ewes, when he has the bull out, if he uses AI. All these sorts of considerations need to be taken into account, whether you think there's a cost benefit in using the vaccine, and also given their location. And that really is a discussion that you need to have with them to help, if they ask you, I presume, but it will be a vet prescribed vaccine only, and for individual farmers. We will still consider vaccinated animals as potentially infected, because, as I said, we don't yet have the evidence that they can't be infectious while vaccinated. So that means, in terms of vaccination, does not get around the need for licensing pre-movement. So next slide, please. I think most of that. Yes, important point, the last 2 points. So it is, so it's slide 4. It's safe for use in pregnant animals, but we cannot say yet that it's safe for use in male animals, which will be used for breeding. We don't have that information. I'm not saying it's definitely unsafe, but we don't have that information yet to say it is. It does seem that some animals, well, obviously, if they have clinical signs and they're pyrexic, that has implications for breeding. We also know that some animals after vaccinated may be PCR positive for a few days after vaccination. So we're advising that you don't move and plan to move for a week or so after vaccination, because, as I said, animals would still need to be licensed if they were going to a farm in the free area. Therefore, they would need to be sampled. And if they've just been vaccinated, we'll not be able to, there isn't a DIVA test, so we'll not be able to distinguish between vaccinated and infected. It's really important for, obviously yourselves will be keeping records of the clients that you have given vaccine to, and we would like to know, not individual clients, but we would like to know on a weekly basis from you what vaccine has gone out of the door, so we understand uptake, and can factor that into our thinking and our conversations with the manufacturers. We absolutely want farmers to keep records of which animals have been vaccinated and which individual animals, as far as possible, I think you sheep there, have been vaccinated. Because as that outbreak, I am expecting, as I said, until the weather gets cooler, we will continue to get confirmed cases and things, and having that information about vaccination on which animals have been vaccinated will be really important. Next slide, please. So speaking to your client about which vaccination, whether vaccine might be of benefit to them. The general license has been published today, and the vaccine can be used by anyone in a Bluetongue 3 disease control zone or in one of the high-risk counties that are demonstrated on the interactive map. So that also means, therefore, Kent, Sussex, and counties where we haven't yet seen disease, but we know they're high risk still of midge incursion from the continent, vaccine can be used in any of these counties. We're not, at the moment, we're focusing supply there rather than in the free area, again, so it can manage down the impact of infection where we know we have disease. There isn't an unlimited supply of vaccine at the moment, but the companies, there will be enough to do within those areas, but the companies continue to produce vaccine on an ongoing basis, and so that's why understanding what the uptake of it is really important for us. Next slide, please. And this is more detail, which is available online in the links. About there are 3 vaccines available, different names of them. They're all for Bluetongue 3, and there's a summary of the product characteristics which you'll want to familiarise yourself. In the Netherlands, I understand all 3 different vaccines were used. I can't really comment, don't have information of how much of one or the other, and if there was any particular indication of one being more effective than the other. I just don't have that information, and I think it will more be about what is available. Next slide, please. And that's some of the further conditions. Unsurprisingly, the animals need to be permanently marked with an official ID. We're allowing farmers to administer the vaccine, but it must be prescribed by a vet. Next slide, please. And a reminder, if you suspect Bluetongue in England, there's the number to phone. If we have a different number for Wales, and then in Scotland, you contact your local field services office. We're happy to take questions now. I think Sasha is moderating the questions which you put in, you type them in online. Sasha can pick them up, and then we can respond. And that's the end of the slides. Thanks, Ellen. Inevitably, there will be things that I will have forgotten to say, and people will pick up on them. Do you have any questions, Sasha?
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I'll go to Irene about this. How long after the temperature falls between 12 degrees are restrictions likely to be lifted?
Oh, I think this is more for our CVO.
That
Right.
might be, sorry.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember in spring, So we continue to collect midges at least once a week. And it's also based on, so the temperatures drop, but it's also based on the number of pigmented midges, which the pigment is to do with how active they are. So when we get below 5 midges in a trap for 3 consistent weeks and enough traps, that's when we declare the vector low period, and that's when we'll lift restrictions. So we have to go 3 consecutive weeks with less than 5 pigmented midges, because that means the temperature has been low enough for a sustained period. So we do it by midges rather than just the temperature, and that will lift that's when we can lift restrictions.
Fabulous, thank you. The next question, this is quite a long question. So I currently oversee the veterinary, so I'll ask this. Yeah, it'll come to you again, Christine. Okay. I currently oversee the veterinary care for a number of zoological collections along the southeast from Norfolk to Kent. These include a number of ungulates from giraffe to bison. Question 1, what is the current guidance on advising vaccination in these species? This is a question from Elliot Simpson-Brown.
So that's a good question. I don't think we have any evidence of use of and haven't. I don't think VMD have looked at the vaccine and considered it in those species. So it would be an off-label use of an unauthorised vaccine. Having said that, it is based on the vaccines that have been well used on the continent. Indeed, we used ourselves for the other strains. I'm not sure if there's any further data in what the manufacturers have produced about use in other species. We'll have to look at that. But so I think ultimately it will be a decision for using the normal cascade and for your consideration of the benefits in those individual species that you want to protect.
Fabulous, thank you, Christine. There's a question here, and I suppose I'll take this one. So can animals go to a fat market in the TCZ to be sold, to go straight to slaughter in the designated abattoir? So moves within market to abattoir within the zone, there's no restrictions on them. So yes, that is possible. From a market in a zone to a designated abattoir under general license, so that is out of the zone. So within the zone, it's fine. Without the zone, it needs to go via a license to a designated abattoir, but that is under a general license. Yes. So you will find the general licenses, they're on the government.uk, and they'll show what the conditions are so everyone knows. One of the conditions is that they need to arrive and be slaughtered 1 hour after sunrise and 2 hours before sunset. So they're not allowed to stay overnight. So hopefully that has answered your questions.
So just had that. So the important point, so those general licenses are available in gov.uk, not like the specific ones where you need to have that pre-planning time, you know, to have your animals in, have them sampled, wait for the test results and things. And as Sasha said, that's for movement from a market that's in the zone to outside the room.
Then I just missed some other questions on the zoological collection. So there's a few more questions here. So what is the likelihood of this impacting exchange? So I hope you remember what I said previously, but what is the likelihood of this impacting exchange of zoo animals within the EU?
So at the moment, we can't send any susceptible live animals to the EU. Likewise, they can't send from their countries with Bluetongue 3 affected animals to us. The vaccine won't facilitate trade because it's not an authorised vaccine and it's not giving full immunity. And in the export health certificate, there's a bit that as the OV you have to sign to say under vaccination and because of the what is known about the vaccine that the animal has become immune. We can't sign that in the certificate. So it for any susceptible species, they cannot currently be moved to the EU, including Northern Ireland, which is not in the EU, of course, but is applying the same requirements.
Thank you, Christine. Next one. I'm sure a lot of zoological collections have the same question. What is the APHA approach regarding an outbreak or suspected outbreak in a zoological collection with respect to these animals? Is there a distinction between zoological collections and farms? I suppose I can already start saying there would not be, they would be treated the same as any other, but we would look at them case by case, because obviously they could have very rare and special breeds, but I'll let Christine comment a bit more on that.
Just to reinforce what you said, so they would be treated in the first instance, our consideration as any other susceptible species, but there can be on occasions provisions for animals of rare genetic value, and that's rare genetic value considered along the international guidelines rather than just a keeper deciding that that specific animal should be of rare genetic value, that it's internationally recognised. Then derogations can be made. That doesn't mean to say that we allow it to stay in. There's going to be a risk assessment and a balance between how much risk of spread of disease is there and the value of the animal.
Thank you. Right, next question. We have many suckler cow herds on the border of the restriction zones, and they're all out at grass. Clients are asking whether to vaccinate the cattle, which will, and then it finished. But yeah, I suppose the question is there whether to vaccinate their cattle, which obviously is a difficult one. Irene, do you want to come in on this?
Well, so as Christine shared earlier on, so that it's still early days with the vaccination, and the data that we have is limited. If we refer to historical data and what happened in 27 and 8 with that outbreak of Bluetongue, the vaccination has definitely helped. You know, we can't probably suggest directly farmer to vaccinate, but definitely the fact that we are making available is a way to say, you know, it's there, and definitely, you know, we hope that will protect. Christine, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I would be taking into account as the farmer, you know, are they the value of the animals to business, whether they're pedigree, suckler cows, when they're going to calf, when you're putting the bull out, the risk period, or are they, you know, suckle calves that are going store or whatever, and so there. We really, as we said, we're seeing fewer clinical signs in cattle than we are in sheep. So we are picking up, on our surveillance, we're picking up positive cattle cases where there have been no clinical signs. We have had a few clinical signs in cattle, but less. And so it's difficult to say that the balance of time and money using the vaccine in the absence of or less clinical signs than we're seeing. There is, in one of our risk assessments, it's not been published yet, it's probably worth noting the density of livestock and susceptible species in the Netherlands is very much higher. I don't necessarily mean that it's lots of intensive farming, but there's lots of smaller farms, highly stocked farms. And it's quite, it stands out quite dramatically compared to Belgium and ourselves and things. So I suspect we won't see those disease levels. 1, because we didn't have it overwintering. 2, because it's not started as early in the summer. And then 3, when you don't have the density of livestock to create that ongoing mid-cycle and local spread. I'm not expecting that we're going to have the rate of confirmations that they have had. but where it will sit below what they've had and none is really difficult to predict. We are doing some more reasonable worst case scenario modelling from those actual first confirmed premises to help us plan. And none of us know how long, when we're winter proper and how cold will it get. And that's why it really has to be, I think, an individual farmer decision with guidance from you as their vet, understanding their management practices.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. An added on question here is that it will be difficult to vaccinate, obviously, these populations that are out. But have there been many reports of severe morbidity or abortion, stillbirth in cattle to warrant the effort for these farmers to vaccinate now?
No, not yet. No, we haven't had those in cattle. We haven't had many in sheep either, but then there's not many pregnant sheep around at the moment. There is one that was reported in the farming press at the weekend, a guy who lambs in the autumn, and he has had abortions and things. We do seem to be seeing, and we haven't got statistical evidence that Pole Dorsets and downbreeds. We do seem to be seeing, I think, more clinical signs in those. Sasha and Irene, you might want to comment. The clinical signs we've seen in cattle are generally 1 or 2 animals in a herd, lame, snotty noses, maybe ulceration around the nose, it could be malignant catarrh, something like that. It doesn't, it is suspect Bluetongue, but it's not necessarily very pathognomic for Bluetongue specifically. Do you want to add anything, Sasha? Because you've read a lot of the report.
I think I'll add that we have had mortalities, in all fairness.
Yes.
And so, yeah, we definitely haven't had the same as Holland. It's very different. But people have lost their animals, and there are animals in pain out there. So I think if you can, even though it's not loads at the minute, it shows that there are that the effects of this virus, that vaccination would have helped those possibly, and made the effects less severe, and maybe would have even saved them. So right. There is a further question. What were the timings for before and after dawn and dusk? So that was 1 hour before dawn. I think, just let me check. It's 1 hour after, so they have to arrive and be slaughtered 1 hour after sunrise and 2 hours before sunset. But that is on the general, you can read that on the general license. It's all very clearly set out. And also the transport would need to be, insecticide will have to have been applied, etc. But that is all very clear on the general license. And I think that is it.
Okay. Thank you, Sasha. So I was just going to remind, on the welfare front, our vets going out to report cases don't carry, and it isn't their role in terms of providing non-steroidals and things to help manage welfare aspects of any poor animal. That's why, going back to Irene's point, we need your support in that, and you working with your client on that front. Our role is about the official sampling, diagnostics, and so on. Absolutely, we can provide welfare advice where we are concerned and things, but we don't have the ability and are not set up to be, providing non-steroidals and prescribing and things to support people. So we will refer, in those cases, farmers back to yourself. Thank you for joining. Obviously, it's an ongoing situation. As I said, we had anticipated it could have started worse, but it has started. We also appreciate for farmers in areas, so Norfolk and Suffolk, experienced some disease and restrictions in the autumn, but for Yorkshire particularly, this is new for them. It's stressful for farmers. You'll be asked lots of questions on that. We've provided you this evening with some of the information that is helpful to you responding. BVA, BCVA, Sheep Vet Society are on the core group, and there are daily updates with them, in-person daily updates, and they should be providing information back out to you. And obviously there's ongoing updates to gov.uk and the APHA veterinary website. Is there anything else, Irene, Sasha, you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to, oh, sorry, I just wanted to add one thing. There's one more comment here and I didn't quite, but yeah, just to mention, there is a really good article in the practice for treatment options for Bluetongue, Lovett and Tarlington, and apparently that's free to download, so please do that.
Excellent. And of course, unlike many other notifiable diseases, treatment is an option for you, unless we're only culling animals where we think it will have a disease control benefit. It's not like HPI or FMD or even TB. Positive animals, where there's no disease control benefit in culling them, then we leave them on farms. So treatment absolutely is an option. Right, let's close there. I hope it's been useful for you. Welcome any feedback on that front. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much to Irene, Sasha, Rich and Ellen for taking more time out and more webinars, but we hope it's a useful way to share information. Great, thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.